Hello, everyone. It's really nice to see your faces. I have to say, my students are at this particular moment preparing for their MA thesis defenses, and we miss them. So, having students' faces, even on the screen in front of ourselves, is quite a pleasure. My name is Alina Trkuljaand. I'm an academic coordinator of the European Regional Masters in Democracy and Human Rights here in Southeast Europe. I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina, definitely a post-conflict society, and many of the issues here related to human rights and human rights violations are directly related to this particular context. When it comes to the ERMA Master Program, we are now enrolling, I have to say, just give you a brief introduction, we are right now enrolling a 20th generation of students to start with us in November. I will ask now Nikolina to present herself briefly, and then we can continue the discussion.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you and to meet you. My name is Nikolina Milic. I recently started working with ERMA 5 months ago. But before this, I was a human rights lawyer in Serbia. I'm originally from Bosnia, but during the conflict, my family relocated to another country, to Serbia. And now I'm back in this country trying to work more on human rights. I was working as a human rights lawyer, more specifically as a refugee lawyer, specialized in litigation of children's rights and representing them in different procedures. So this is, I think, from my side. I was also working for a Serbian watchdog called Belgrade Center for Human Rights, and we've been producing many reports on different aspects of human rights in the country and in the region, and also cooperated with the treaty bodies, UN treaty bodies, and the Council of Europe and its bodies as well.
So maybe you could tell us a bit about what are the kind of the big issues around women's rights, CEDAW and women's equality in Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, in the Southeast Europe region.
Just to give a little bit of the context, where we sit now, and the overall region is going through let's say, a painful process of democratization, but also de-democratization. And this is very important to note. We've been having quite a serious rise lately in terms of authoritarian, let's say, tendencies and intentions when it comes to political governance all over the region, with some countries being part of the European Union and some on the path to the EU accession, having multiple difficulties on this path. One of the major characteristics and problems when it comes to human rights in general are definitely media freedoms that are being more and more restricted from year to year by these, let's say, and as a consequence of these authoritarian tendencies. Another, let's say, very important issue is dealing with the past, lack of proper reconciliation after the violent conflict at the big conflicts in multiple countries of the region at the beginning of the 90s. Still, many issues in this context are not being resolved, and the proper reconciliation has never been achieved. There are many different, of course, activities. Our master is, in fact, one of these let's say, reconciliation initiatives as well, because we bring students together from all over the region, from the countries that have been in conflict in the 90s, in order to, bring them together to discuss these issues, and also to create some sort of a joint awareness around these issues from the 90s, and perhaps jointly overcome them, let's say. When it comes to women's rights, it is important to say that aside from the CEDAW Convention that you've so far, I believe, heard of, in the context of the Council of Europe, and most of the European countries today also have another very important document in this field, and it is called the Istanbul Convention, and it is Convention against on the prevention of violence against women, focusing only on different aspects of violence that women are exposed to in their everyday lives in most of our societies that are, as you may imagine, still rather patriarchal, I would say. So there are several issues related to, well, more than several issues related to CEDAW Convention, but also issues related to the implementation and fulfillment of the obligations stemming from the Istanbul Convention in our region. I will invite Nikolina to speak a little bit about the CEDAW Convention and the related issues.
So as you may not know, or maybe know, all of these countries in the region actually ratified many of the conventions, international conventions, and CEDAW and the other, and usually without any reservations, which means that that we have here the solid legislative basis for the improvement and guaranteeing of women's rights. However, when it comes to implementation, there are significant issues that you can also read from the CEDAW committee's reports on each of these countries. One of the issues that you can see everywhere is violence against women. Every year we hear about tens of dozen of cases of women who were killed by their intimate partners or by their husbands because they are seen to betray some sort of traditional values because of jealousy, and where such violence was even in certain court judgments. This intimate violence has this issue that it's intimate violence. It has been taken as something that is sorry, kako se kaže opravdavajuća, olakšavajuća okolnost. There is something that the perpetrator should get lesser sentence because of that, because he did it because of love, or he felt that he was betrayed. The other thing is discrimination, which is also seen everywhere, even in the political sphere, where women are, even in some parliaments, are being referred in a discriminatory way. In these countries, there was this attempt to increase number of women in parliaments, which is why we have enacted the laws that are guaranteeing 30% of women to be in executive power and also in the parliament. In the parliament, not everywhere in the executive, but mostly in the parliament. However, the real power does not lie in the hands of women. So even if women are in a very important positions, such as in Serbia, for example, as a prime minister, the real power does not lie in the hands of this prime minister, but in the hands of the president, which the prime minister is very close to. Other things are that many surveys show that women spend way more time doing the unpaid jobs, that they are paid lesser for the same job they are performing as their male peers, which is something that we have to work on more in the future.
Aside from the issues of femicide, issues related to lack of proper political participation and representation of women in politics and discrimination, there are also several...
So we can't quite hear you.
I'm so sorry. So aside from these three very important issues that Nikolina mentioned, that include femicide, lack of proper political representation of women in the political parties, but also in the executive branches of the government, as well as discrimination in the workplace, unequal pay, so on and so forth. There are several other issues that I wanted to mention. One is related to the issues of abortion. That is very important. What you need to understand in terms of the context of the region is that most of these countries used to be socialist countries, which meant that in legal terms, men and women had equal rights ever since the end of, more or less, the end of the World War II. So from the 50s of the 20th century, getting also the right to vote rather early in history, earlier than many of the very well-developed European democracies. And also the abortion was legalized in that time, and women had access to free abortion during those years. After the conflicts of the 90s, we have something that is referred to as re-traditionalization of our societies, meaning that they are becoming more patriarchal than they used to be prior to the conflicts in the 90s. And this brings, and not only re-traditionalization, but also religion is taking more and more space in the public discourse, in the politics, in public institutions, so on and so forth. And this brings to several very important issues also related to abortion, because in many countries, Croatia in particular, that is today a country of the European Union, there are tendencies of restricting the right to abortion. Today, women are required to pay to go through psychological, there are some initiatives for women to be obliged to go through psychological counseling before, let's say, exercising their bodily, the right to their, bodily integrity and freedom to do what they want, let's say, with their bodies. And these are some crucial issues. Also in Montenegro, one of the smallest, let's say, countries of the region, we have something that is going for many years now, and this is called selective abortion. Selective abortion means that because Montenegro is a very patriarchal society, women have to do the testing once they get pregnant to establish whether the child to be is a female or male. And then, because of the influence of the family and of the patriarchal tradition, because it is considered that it's more valuable to have a son than daughter, abortions are being performed very often. There are calculations that in the past 10 years, it is more than 10,000 female children has been lost, let's say, in this horrible process of selection based on gender. So these are some of the very important and most pressing issues today. Of course, aside from issues related to the rights of LGBTI population, still very problematic when it comes to range of freedoms and of course rights LGBTI persons are entitled to. Still, they don't have the freedom of assembly in many of the countries. Pride marches are being banned, so on and so forth. We did have the first Pride March in Bosnia and Herzegovina held last year successfully, luckily without violence. But already this year, because of the pandemics, LGBTI community was not able to, let's say, fight for their rights in this way. If you have questions, please, we will be very happy to respond.
So does anyone have a question?
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Gracie.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening from the Philippines. I am Gracie. I'm just gonna turn off my video because I'm having connection problem. But yeah. As I understand your situation, I think the issues are deeply rooted in patriarchal tradition, and you've mentioned that in many countries, there's no freedom of assembly. I'm just wondering, so what are the opportunities to actually lobby for women's rights? What are the possible things that we can do to actually advocate or campaign for women's rights or gender equality? Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, there are two aspects, of course. One is a very high influence, not only high influence, but also high presence of the international community in the region. There are many UN agencies working very actively on these issues, lobbying fiercely for women's rights. On the other hand, there is an important aspect, contextual aspect, which is the accession of these countries to the European Union, and the achievement of gender equality is one of the requirements. So the European Union institutions are also pushing very much towards legislative changes, and a lot of changes in different laws, like gender equality acts, have been brought in the countries of the region, but are not subsequently being implemented in many of these aspects. Aside from the international community, and let's say its human rights aspect, so UN Women, so on and so forth, there are many international donors coming from, let's say, Scandinavian countries like SIDA, funding, and also British government, so on and so forth, funding, investing quite a lot, in particular in the civil society organizations that are working on the issues related to women's rights. Luckily, we have a really well-developed civil society, aside from the international community, that is working on these issues, and progress and different achievements are really recorded every single year. And I have to say, I'm very proud to say that in UN Women, only in the Sarajevo office, where we sit now, we have 6 alumni from our program working on these issues. And I think that we as human rights defenders and you as human rights students have a lot of power and knowledge once, of course, you finish your master's, to be engaged in these issues and make a real difference. And this is something I've been following for the past 10 years since I'm working for the program. And I can see that our alumni are really very active in the field. So these are some of the ways. Nikolina?
I would just like to add that aside from advocacy, one very important segment is strategic litigation. In the Southeast European region, in these countries that I know of better, Bosnia and Serbia, there is not a lot of strategic litigation in this area. The issue is that the justice is slow here. The trials can last up to 10 years, and usually people, the people just at the beginning of this process, they don't want to bother with it. So there's not enough litigation in this area, and maybe we all should think about that, and maybe you and our students, when they graduate, they should be more involved in this aspect as well, because advocacy and strategic litigation, they go hand in hand. This is the only way when we can bring the tangible change in the society. And this actually takes a lot of time. I was working with my team on it was a torture case in Serbia. So the case was litigated, we started litigating it, my colleagues, in the beginning of 2000s. And in 2005, we got the decision from the European Court of Human Rights. And it took 5 or more years for it to get acknowledged by the government and for the government to do actually something about it. There's another case as well, which is about missing babies in Serbia. I don't know if you know this, but during 70s, 80s, and 90s, a lot of children got missing from the hospital when they were born, and parents never got any information on what happened to their children. There's a strong indication that these children were subject of international trafficking in children. that were sold to families in different countries. And the European Court of Human Rights established that Serbia violated the Convention on European Convention of Human Rights, and more specifically the right to family life of one parent, and said and urged Serbia, gave them, it's told that Serbia has to establish a mechanism and to find in each of all of the other cases, not just that one, what happened to these children. This case was, the judgment became final in 2014, and 6 years from then, we still don't have any clue, nor did Serbia has a mechanism or any idea how to establish this. So after the litigation, there's a lot of advocacy that needs to be done. Litigated a strong ground to advocate for its implementation.
And
of that particular case, one of our students did her MA thesis research, doing also interviews, parents of the missing of can contribute to strengthening of rights and women's in particular, and this is research. Of course, you as students will tomorrow do your MA thesis research, and you may choose, of course, some of these topics and contribute to the overall knowledge about the violations of human rights and women's rights in particular. And this is something that students of our master women's I've personally for the European Parliament on women's rights in the Western Balkans, and based off our reporting on our research done in the field through interviews, through different data gathering techniques, we have achieved that the European Parliament brings a resolution related to women's rights in the Western Balkans. This is something that you can do tomorrow and really contribute to a lot of changes by producing research, by producing reports in the field of human rights.
yes, good. And that means that they should be doing all their reading and attending all their classes, which I'm sure they are doing. But I think next we've got, is it Teresa who's going to go next? Is that right? Yeah, sorry, Kenny. We'll get Kenny and then Teresa. So Kenny?
Yeah, sorry. This is Kenny. I'll just like to know a bit more about like the public's opinion, because I know it's a patriarchal society, so I'm assuming there's like setback to the women's rights and so on. But in general, is the public like accepting of it? Are they hostile towards like the human rights workers and efforts, so on?
Generally speaking, I would say no. But if you look at what governments are doing and how they are controlling media, there is quite a lot of hate speech against human rights defenders, and quite a lot of hate speech against women who are vocal in their feminist fight and struggle. There are many occurrences of hate speech. There are many occurrences even of death threats. And these are all related to the ruling parties that are ruling in the government, because they are very much interested in keeping the patriarchal order that keeps them in the way in power. Therefore, they are trying to suppress in any possible way, in particular through media, and threaten all those who are fighting for women's rights and gender equality in general. Luckily, I would say this is being closely monitored and sanctioned by the international community here, and they cannot be as open in their threats as they would perhaps like to be because of the EU accession process. So they know that ruling parties know that if they show open hostility towards human rights defenders, towards women's rights defenders, that our path towards EU accession would be endangered. And therefore, there are normally these attacks and threats come from, we call it botovi. I don't know how to translate this.
They're bots. They're people who are paid to undermine everything that you write and advocate for on social medias or
exactly, especially in the online sphere, there is quite a lot of hate speech, but really coming from paid individuals.
I would like to add something more about Serbia. That recently there has been several cases of women who are being sexually harassed and abused by executive power officials. There was one case that's very interesting, to say it like that, where one he's like a mayor of a city in Serbia, and this man sent 15,000 of harassing SMS messages, text messages, to one of his employees, and he harassed her as well physically, not just like this. And this woman, she got the strength with the assistance of women's rights advocates, and she decided to pursue justice and to speak out open. And actually, this trial was undermined completely by the court of that city, because the court was under the power of the mayor. They were not ready to be to judge against him. So the trial continued in another city, and this woman was molested over media. She was called names. She was under such a horrible media pressure by bots and but she managed a fight of women, harassment which was for many years deemed normal in the society as Serbia, and women were not ready to speak out, and they were not brave enough to speak out for their rights and for the rights of other women as well.
Wow, 15,000 messages. You wonder how we got time to do anything else. That's a lot. But I think now we've got, is it Teresa, your question?
Yeah. And thank you for the time. So my question is related to the Bosnia Muslim women and the consequences of the Bosnia War between 1992 to 1995. So in that war, like a lot of Bosnia Muslim women, they are subjected to get like forced impregnant and also like forced rape. At the same time, the government also like detected the strategy of mass rape, because they want like the severe military, because severe military wants to the Muslim women to get to deliver their child, their baby within the war. So that's why like my question is like, what are the impacts of because of this war, like the Muslim women, they got like pregnant, and they don't want the child, but they got the pregnant. They were forced to get pregnant. So that what are the impacts are stay suffering to these Muslim women and then the children. So at the moment, so, and also how's the government taking the responsibility of for these kinds of women victims.
But like before you answer, I think also Yogi had the similar question. Do you want to add anything to that, Yogi?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Yeah, I think my question is quite similar to Teresa. So yeah, I think Nicola can answer it. Thank you.
But Teresa's from Myanmar, and in Myanmar, there has been a history of similar problems of this. We know there has been rape used as a weapon of war, particularly amongst ethnic minority women as well. But I'll turn it over now to Alina and Nicola.
We're having a bit of difficulties with our speakers, so my colleague is now trying to plug in the speakers so that we can clearly hear the questions. Yes, you are right. As a consequence of war and this practice of intentional impregnation of women of different ethnic group during the war, there have been the international community has estimated that there have been over 20,000 women raped during the conflict in the 90s. And recently, there is quite a lot of attention also given to the fact that a lot of men have been subjected also to wartime sexual violence. And there is quite a lot of research done. When it comes to this particular issue, nobody knows the exact number of babies born out of this horrifying practice, because rape in our societies, I guess, as everywhere, is considered sort of a shame. So many women kept this as a secret from their families and also from their children for many, many years. So we don't know publicly about many such cases, but there are several children born out of this practice that are today very public about this issue, in particular here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and have recently, now you can imagine 20 years after the war, when they've become grown-ups, they are now fighting, let's say, for their rights, and not only this, but for shedding light on this horrible practice, and for prevention of such cases in the future. There were many facilities during the war that have been turned into rape camps, and this is something we all unfortunately have to live with. This is one of the terrible legacies of the 90s that today we are kind of fighting against and trying to get them acknowledged so that non-occurrence is established, let's say. Also in this sense, there are several very important international organizations like Trial International, and also, believe it or not, the International Organization for Migrations, that have very important international projects to help women survivors of wartime sexual violence in different ways. And one of those ways is, of course, assisting them, giving them legal assistance with their cases. Now, many of these women were not entitled to any sort of reparations after the war. So we have a paradoxical situation that war veterans, for example, those who fought in the war, who are military victims, have reparations and have very high statuses in our societies, while civilian victims and victims of rape do not have recognition, do not have proper reparations. And these women had to go through a very, very painful and long process of proving that was also, depriving them even more of their dignity and re-traumatize them, of proving that they were raped in order to be able to get a really miserable sort of monetary reparation for what they've gone through during the war. And because of this terrible practice, a number of women has decided to go and file different complaints and lawsuits against the country. But because the laws were never adjusted, they had to go to higher instances. And now there are several cases in front of the European Court for Human Rights that are being, and these women are being helped by Trial International, with provided legal assistance. But we still don't have positive cases.
Yes. And I would just like to add that if you read the Convention Against Torture, then you know that the country has, all of the countries that are signatories and that ratify this convention, they have the obligation to rehabilitate and to reparate actually victims of torture, which these women who were raped as a mean of war, they are most certainly victims of torture, and they cannot access justice and their right to be compensated, to be rehabilitated, to be reparated, not only by getting some money, but also by getting a quality psychosocial assistance and other kind of assistance that a victim truly needs in order to continue life normally.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it sounds like it's such a legacy that those kinds of things are. But let's now go to Brennan. You've got a question, Brennan?
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
So I have a quick question going back to the beginning. You guys had mentioned that the current government is going through this transition right now from an authoritarian government to a more democratic in respects. Has the government declared like an emergency law or any type of law they're enacting right now that would be used in many ways, or is being used to enforce restrictions as you kind of described?
You mean
Okay.
related to the pandemics, to the ongoing situation?
Say that again.
You are relating your question to the ongoing pandemics right now and the dynamics in political. Yes,
Yeah,
we did
you
have.
said they're training, but there's still an your government is still it's still authoritarian.
Well, according to the Freedom House, up until a couple of years ago, most of the governments, most of the countries were regarded as free, undergoing democratization, progressing well in the democratization process. Recently, this has changed, and two countries of the region, in particular Serbia and Montenegro, have been in the latest reports have been named or let's say evaluated as only partially free or even not free countries, meaning falling back to the authoritarian regimes. I think Nikolina can give you a real life experience from Serbia, because she was in Serbia that had the strongest, let's say, repressive measures during the pandemics and the times of isolation. What was very interesting is that the government in that particular country lifted all the measures just to have the elections in order to stay in power, and then reinstalled the measures back. So Nikolina can tell you more.
Yes, regarding Serbia, Serbia for the past, since 2012, actually has people in power, the same people who were in power during the 90s, that pushed Serbia into wars, and that were directly or indirectly, but mostly directly responsible for what happened in Bosnia in the war. So they were just, they came into power in 2012, and one of the minister of propaganda in the 90s became first the prime minister of Serbia, but later now the president. But who is the president in Serbia does not have much power. However, he claims all the power, and he exercises all the positions, including sometimes he's going into public and telling the judges what they should decide in a particular case, putting a pressure on them. In the state of emergency, as everything else was his personal, he said, I'm going to lift the state of emergency, even though before this we did not have emergency situation, which is a bit lesser restrictive environment. but he lifted on an emergency state, and then which was done actually contrary to the constitution of Serbia, which is why me and my colleagues, we made several constitutional initiatives to the Constitutional Court, providing them with information that clearly indicates that the president and Serbia violated the constitution by lifting the state of emergency in the way that they did it. But the Constitutional Court said that this was not constitutional, even though not even technical prerequisites were not in place. The only one initiative that was actually that the Constitutional Court accepted was the one that was that concerned the violation of the principle ne bis in idem, which means the prevention of double penalties for the same act, because the two different legal acts that were enacted during the emergency state, they one said that you can be penalized for misdemeanor, and then the other said that you can, for the same act, be penalized in a criminal procedure. So this was the only one that was accepted. So Serbia is, like, speaking from a person who was living there for many years, I can say that Serbia is one unfree country where people who are fighting for unprivileged, people who are fighting for human rights and democracy are being called names, are being called as foreign collaborators, as people who are paid by Soros, meaning that they are putting the targets on the bodies of the human rights defenders, making them very viable for threats by public, who is in this state of propaganda on the state-owned medias and many private medias. So it is very hard to be a human rights defender in Serbia, especially if you're advocating for an issue that is politically sensitive. So people who are fighting for the rights of Roma communities, the rights of children, this is not an issue as long as you're not tackling the domestic abuse of children, the domestic violence against children. But if you are fighting for, I don't know, things that are related to war crimes, for Serbia to acknowledge its role in what happened in Bosnia, what Alina told you about briefly, and if you're fighting for LGBTI, or migrants and refugees, as I did, then you are going to be a target in the media and possibly also physically. And just to say one thing, that media workers, the professional journalists who are doing their job very well, they're also being under threat. And Freedom House and numerous international organizations of journalists, they condemned this practice in Serbia and said that Serbia is a very unsafe place for you to be a journalist in.
Okay, so maybe we've got a question from Zoe next. Are you there, Zoe?
Yeah, what I heard about the Istanbul Conventions, is it different from CEDAW conventions, or what is the differences between those two? And I would like to know how the reporting process goes, the Istanbul Conventions and the CEDAW.
Yeah, and Zoe, just introduce yourself so they know who that.
Oh, I'm Zobi. I'm from Myanmar.
Okay, so the both conventions, of course, are dealing with women's rights. The CEDAW, the convention, the Istanbul Convention, is dealing with a particular segment of protecting women from violence, and it is a Council of Europe instrument that also has its body that's called a Grevio Committee, that also countries that are a part of this convention, are a signatory to this convention, they have to report to this committee, and committee can, I think, even come to the country to do a visit. I'm not sure about, sorry, this is not the very my topic, but I'm not sure whether there are individual communications to that committee. I don't think so. Like to CEDAW, but this committee has more focused issue that they're dealing with. It's the violence against women and prevention of such violence.
When it comes to reporting, regional countries are now actually going through the first reporting cycle. There are about 50 questions to be answered, and afterwards the reporting will be done every 4 years. So this is the basic reporting cycle.
Okay, next we have Renata. You've got a question. Just introduce yourself briefly at the start, Renata.
Hi, good evening from Indonesia. I'm Renata. So I'm interested when you raise issue about the same work, same paid for the women. So because when in Indonesia, the contact is when we're working with the labor unions, the contact is always socialist and communism, something like that. But the thing is, like, the same thing is the patriarchal culture is still there. So, you know, like, even though with the ideology of socialists, but the approach is like totally different. So women also have a low participations in labor unions. So in the context of your countries in East Europe, what is the strategy to raise issue on same work, same pay for women? And is there any involvement of the union? And what is the culture of unions there? Thank you.
Unfortunately, I have to say that labor unions have been weakened quite a lot. While, as you can imagine, in socialist times, the unions had quite an important political place in the society. Today, their role is being marginalized, and not only that, but unions are being hijacked by political parties and political party members in the ruling positions, so to weaken them from within. I don't know that much about other countries, but in Bosnia and Herzegovina, luckily, we have a very strong union of workers in the trade. You know, workers working in supermarkets, in small shops, and so on and so forth. I'm not sure what the exact word for that is in English, but it is very strong. It is women-led because women are overwhelmingly employed in this particular sector and are very much and very severely deprived of basic workers' rights. From minimum wage being terribly low to minimum wage not being respected by employers. There are even some cases where women have to do their 8 or 10-hour shifts, for example, at the cash register in the supermarkets without being allowed to not being allowed to leave this place, even to go to the restroom. So they have to wear diapers. And this union has been very, very, very much vocal on the, thank you, service industry. Thank you, Mike. It was the word that I was looking for. And this union has luckily been very much vocal in order to fight for women's rights in this particular sector. Aside from this, to be honest, I don't know of many strong initiatives in this particular area and for ending of this particular violation of women's rights.
But you can still, I would just like to add, even though all of these countries have this independent human rights body that's called Commissioner for Equality, and that if you read the reports of these bodies, you can see that women are among the most discriminated in the society. Of course, I'm putting the disclaimer that among those who complain, because the most discriminated usually do not complain because they don't know that they can complain. but women continue to be, you can still see on the shops or in the job advertisements in the service industry that they're employing women, and there's a salary, for example, 300 or something, and a man 350. And this is like publicly displayed, and this is an obvious the obvious case of discrimination that we can all see everywhere. And at the same time, I think that for the past couple of years, more women than men are receiving higher education, like university education, but still they don't have the equal representation in the highest decision-making places, be it in the government or in business.
So we just got 2 more questions because we've got 8 minutes left. And so the next question from Sidra.
Thank you so much. I'm Sidra from Pakistan. My question is related to your introductory talk, that when you were talking about the discrimination and the society level of understanding towards women and gender issues, that when we have ratified the CEDAW, and then there is a UNCRC 1325 resolution, do you think that in you living in your country, or there could be it could be a strong or advocacy tool for awareness raising, even for the conflict areas or who have a history of conflict zones? And secondly, if possible and time would be there, what is the status of the national human rights institutions in your country or area? Thank you.
So it's not UNCRC resolution. I think it's UN Assembly resolution. Yes, I think. But this is the only tool that we have, actually. We have the ratified convention. So this is what we use as an advocacy tool. This is what we use, this reporting process. We human rights workers, we do it to report to the committee alternatively, to make sure that the committee knows about these things, and also to use their recommendation as an advocacy tool. Regarding abortion issue in Serbia, this is I cannot say in Serbia. I don't think there's an issue with this. There's actually I don't know about this. I'm sorry, but I think that there are no not that much issues because abortion is legal. But there's a lot of social pressure actually on women against this. So I don't think if that answers your question. National human rights institutions, they're of course they should be independent of the government, but they should pertain to the Paris principles. However, for example, the ombudsman of Serbia, the holder of this position is being was the present one was elected in the parliament by the members of the ruling party, and it is somebody who is not very well known in human rights area in Serbia. We cannot say that he is a human rights defender. So all of the institutions' work in the past 2 years has led to the fact that the Association of Human Rights Institutes, ENRI, in Europe, has classified a Serbian ombudsman as degraded it from A to B level, which means that it is not as independent as it should be.
Yes, I have to say, when it comes to the status of national human rights institutions, the Serbian case illustrates the situation in most of the countries of the region. Today, I can say that in Croatia, the ombudsman institution or ombudsperson's institution is rather strong and is quite vocal and brave, I would say, especially the is quite vocal and brave against what can be considered as, let's say, right-wing policies, right-wing public appearances of many politicians and tendencies in the society. And they can be regarded as true human rights defenders because they can, recognize what can be regarded even as fascist tendencies in societies and then kind of react publicly against them. While in Serbia, this is definitely not the case. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have a very particular case because the country has 3 ethnic groups that have fought in the war, and the principle of equality has been established after the war, where these three ethnic groups are considered equal in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Then for each and every position you have to have 3 persons nominated. So we have 3 presidents, 1 from each ethnic group, but we also have 3 ombudspersons. And the paradoxical issue here is the fact that, and they all have, I would say, what is called today's right-wing policies, meaning they're fighting for their own ethnic group only and portray others and treat others as enemies, basically. So you can imagine an independent human rights institution where you have 3 ombudspersons being nominated for these positions by the strongest ruling parties of 3 ethnic groups. How much can we actually speak about independence in such a context? And another paradoxical thing is that even these ombudspersons don't see anything problematic about the way how they are being nominated in this particular body. So there are many issues there. Our ombudsman institution has been established by the international community after the war, in fact, by the OSCE. And even today, they are still working on strengthening this particular institution, but are being very much disappointed, just as we are, I would say, about the ways in which this institution functions.
So just last quick question then from Om about the 30%. Are you there, Om? Do you want to ask your question?
We've been having 30% quota in our election laws, I believe in the last 10 years, not more than that. There are some interesting developments. There are some interesting developments there. At a certain point, those countries that have progressed more, let's say, in this EU path, did put quite a lot of effort in putting more women on the lists, electoral lists, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, more women on the electoral list doesn't mean that more women are actually going to be elected and then represented in the political institutions. Normally, these women occupied, the final places on the lists were not put as those who were carrying the major positions, and therefore they were normally not elected subsequently. There was an interesting case in North Macedonia, for example, where until 5 years ago, they had over 30% of women in the parliament. That was very interesting. But after the two rounds of latest elections, the number has seriously dropped. I don't think in the region there is a country where we actually have 30% of women in the parliament. There are women in the electoral lists, but they don't make it to the places after the elections.
Just, I would like to add 2 things. One thing is that Serbia actually had the same problem as Alina said, that women would be at the down of the political list. So if you get women are after 100th place and you only get 80 places, of course, women are not going to get into parliament. And then Serbia changed under this strong advocacy campaign, they changed the law. And now every 3rd place on the list has to be occupied by female. But then we had another problem, is that after they would be elected, women would resign, and then the a next male would occupy the position. So if you have, I don't know, 10 people elected, and you have 3 or 4 women there, after the election, they would return their mandates to the party, because it's not the party is being elected and not the person. They would return it and then the party would put somebody else, usually men. And the other thing is that it's not about the form, it's about the substance. So we have to ask ourselves, how much power do these women have? If we have women who are elected just to sit there and do nothing, then this is not equal representation. So if you see women who are very strong, who are occupying strong position, they're under a lot of problems. First, to climb in their parties, to be in the place, to be elected, to be in the executive or anywhere else, and then to hold this position strong and not to be influenced by the political party leader, who is most often a man. And this proved to be very problematic. And if you see the divisions in the parliament, they have different boards that are they're dealing with certain issues, important issues in the country, and women are in the board for children's rights, for environmental rights, but you cannot see one single woman in the security board that is dealing with the security policy of the country, or there are not women in the army. So I think only recently there has been one woman in Serbia that became a general, but they couldn't even go into an army school, or this thing that is still very male, and women are not getting access to it.
Well, 33% in the National Assemblies of Pakistan. That's great to hear.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Because I think in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh all have 20 or 30% representatives. Maybe Sidra, you want to give, have you got any comments on that? Does it sound similar what's happening in Pakistan to what's happening in Bosnia-Herzegovina?
Yeah, first of all, though, is there that I can relate this Bosnia-Herzegovina issue when even I was like maybe 5-6 years old. I used to hear and watch the news on national TV all the time, Chechnya, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and all the bloodshed I've been raised by watching on my national TV. So I'm like very much, I used to stand in front of the television and I used to say that why they are killing the woman, why they are killing the children. So this is very close to my heart. And the situation regarding the gender discrimination, gender biasness, and then coming to the most sensitive topic of abortion, this is highly like a stereotyped issue, taboo issue, and women cannot easily have access for the abortion. It is against the Islamic laws, and because we have a male dominated society, majority is misogynist. They even they don't support the rape survivors, and they victim blaming is there. So like I can say like 99% whatever you stated, I think like I was listening about Pakistan. So this is so much close to the society we are facing nowadays, and due to polarization now, this is coming more strongly, and on social media we can see that they the they whenever women is commenting at a public forums, at any under some news report or anything, everything is gone wrong for the woman, and then they use the blasphemy law. So the list goes on, and situation is not good regarding human rights in Pakistan. However, the National Human Rights institutes in Pakistan, we have ombudsperson for provincial ombudsperson for the status of woman. We have ombudsperson for the anti-sexual harassment at workplace for all provinces, and the chairpersons are all women. and then time to time civil society is inviting them for trainings and on gender. So we are trying a lot that trying to streamline all these institutions, and advocacy is quite strong regarding the gender for parliamentarians. Thank you.
So thanks, and we're over time, so I'll have to finish it there. But I really appreciate the time you've given Alina and Nicola. That was great, and it was really interesting discussion. So thanks everyone. We'll say goodbye. I'm going to stop recording.